You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 24th of February 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up.
Herzlichen Dank für das Vertrauen, das Sie uns und das Sie auch mir persönlich.
The man most likely to be Germany's next Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, thanks his supporters after the Christian Democrats get the biggest number of votes in the federal elections. So now it's time to form a coalition, but will the new administration have what it takes to fix a stagnant economy and face a world full of change? Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, what did Syria do next? We'll have the latest from our correspondent, who's just returned from a country trying to find its voice. Plus, with cow mascots and fears for the future of farming, we'll be in Paris as the world's biggest food and agriculture fair begins. And
for many Canadians, no longer did the flag feel entirely universal. It seemed now to represent the worldview of the few rather than that of the many.
We'll mark the 60th anniversary of the Canadian flag and we'll look at the papers too. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Volodymyr Zelensky says he's willing to give up the presidency of Ukraine if it brings peace to his country and speeds up admission to NATO. He was speaking on the eve of today's third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Israel has sent tanks into the occupied West Bank for the first time in more than 20 years, and the Vatican says Pope Francis remains in a critical condition in hospital. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories, but first, the man tipped to be Germany's next Chancellor has called for a coalition government to be formed quickly. Friedrich Merz's centre-right Christian Democrats won the largest share of the votes in Germany's snap election. The far-right Alternative für Deutschland came second. It may take a little while for Chancellor the forthcoming Chancellor Merz to form a coalition cabinet, though. And to tell us more, I'm joined now from Berlin by Monocle's senior news editor, Chris Cermak. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Emma.
It's amazing how you get used to saying the names of chancellors, isn't it? And you have to adapt to change. Just tell us, you were at the CDU, the Christian Democrats, the victorious Conservatives, last night at the election victory party. What was it like?
So it was very interesting. I mean, this is a party that is used to governing, frankly, Emma. They had Angela Merkel for a number of years, as you know, a record number of years. And now they have Friedrich Merz, who is very different in his person, but has brought this party back to a quite decisive result in these elections, even if everything else below him in terms of the results is quite uncertain. So this is a party that I would say was very happy. There was a lot of cheering, obviously, when the results came in. Even if it's not maybe quite as high as they would have expected, they would have liked to have gotten more than 30%. They were aiming for even 35% if they could, and they just got about 28.5% of the result. So, you know, it's a good result for the CDU. They are back in the lead. It looks like Friedrich Merz will be the next Chancellor of Germany, almost certainly. But nonetheless, there is a little bit of a question about why they didn't do better.
Do we know any reason about why the others did? When we look at the Social Democrats, Olaf Scholz's party, they came third behind the Alternative für Deutschland. That was expected, but it's still a very stark result, isn't it, for all three parties?
Well, it is the worst result in the history of the Social Democrats. So that is something that Olaf Scholz, the current chancellor, had to take responsibility for. The Greens did not do very well either. They went down back to around 12%. This is just a repudiation of the government we've currently had the last 3 years. There was a lot of infighting. The Free Democrats, the third coalition partner, fell out of the parliament completely. So it just shows you that people have been unhappy with the direction of government currently. So I think that would be the biggest thing. It's that, you know, the current government parties all lost very significantly. And as a result, it was the Christian Democrats and the Alternative for Germany, it must be said, that made the gains. The Alternative for Germany having its best result ever, nearly 20% of the vote. It came first in the former East Germany, so a huge result for them. Also, result of lots of new people voting. This was the best turnout that Germany has had since the 1980s, a big jump. You had 83% rather of people voting, and most of those newcomers voted for either the Alternative for Germany or Die Linke, so basically both for the more extreme sides of the spectrum.
We now have the phenomenally difficult job of trying to create a coalition government out of these parties. Is there a sense that Merz is going to go for 2 parties, 3 parties? Coalitions have worked until quite recently in Germany. But this time, let's not forget that the reason why we had a snap election was because the coalition collapsed.
Well, exactly. And that was a 3-party coalition. It must be said that at the end, there's been a lot of questions about this last night because of the way the results were looking. At the end of the day, there is this thing in Germany where parties need to make 5% of the vote in order to come into parliament. And there were 2 parties that were just on the threshold of that, the Free Democrats and then the Bündnis Wagenknecht, which is on the left side of the spectrum. Both of those did not make it. The Bündnis Wagenknecht didn't make it by a hair. They're at 4.97%. And the reason I mention that is because the fact that both of those fell out gives other parties more seats in the parliament. And what it means is that actually Friedrich Merz will be able to form a 2-party coalition with the Social Democrats. That just about works out in the parliament, and that is what he was looking for. He had made clear in this campaign that he really only wants a 2-party coalition that is going to be so much easier to manage. And so he's really gotten what he wanted there. That said, this was a very divisive election campaign. The Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats really went at it throughout. And last night during the party at the CDU, I spoke with Gordon Hoffmann. He's the general secretary of the CDU in Brandenburg. And I asked him about the sort of vitriol of this campaign and whether these 2 centrist parties could really come together again in government.
It was a rough campaigning time, and I think it was quite good that we had lots of discussions and debates about different approaches to politics. I think that's something we missed during the last years for quite a while. And still we're Democrats in the middle, so it won't be a problem to get back together again.
The world is watching. Friedrich Merz said that as well. How does that feel? How does Germany retake a leadership role in Europe?
Well, I think it's good we have a result now, and I think it's very good that we have a clear result. Friedrich Merz is going to be the next chancellor, and I think we have to hurry up because Europe and the rest of the world can't wait longer for Germany to take this role. I'm very confident that Friedrich Merz, who is a well-known European, he's a transatlantic, so I'm very happy we got this result, and I'm very confident he can do a good job on this.
So that's Gordon Hoffmann, General Secretary of the CDU for Brandenburg there, saying that, Europe is watching closely, isn't it, Chris? They don't want to wait that long for Germany to get its act together because they don't have the time. But there is a problem here, isn't it, that Merz and Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, can't stand each other.
Well, that is a fair point. But at the same time, I do have to say that Friedrich Merz really put a premium on this idea of European unity when all the party leaders gathered around the table yesterday evening to speak. Friedrich Merz said that European unity would be his priority, his number 1 priority. So he understands the issues here. And yes, on the one hand, Ursula von der Leyen and Friedrich Merz don't understand each other well. There's particularly a lot of big spat over migration. That's going to be a big issue in this campaign. But at the same time, when it comes to the big issues, particularly of Ukraine and European defense, this is an area where they are of a similar line and where the other parties are of a similar line with Friedrich Merz as well. So that's, I think, maybe the reason that there is some focus in this campaign and an understanding that they will actually be able to get together in a coalition, maybe even a little more quickly than we expect.
So what are the big challenges now facing the new German government?
So Europe is a big challenge. Migration is going to be a huge challenge as well, probably the biggest challenge for these parties to get together and get an understanding on. And then there's the economy, of course, as well. Germany is in recession, essentially. It has been for the last couple of years. And I spoke with Wolfgang Schleicher. He's a member of an association of German poultry farmers and a spokesperson for Bavarian farming and forestry. I asked him about the poor state of the German economy.
Yeah, it's a hard time for the economy in Germany, and I think Friedrich Merz is the right guy to change the things who are necessary for an economy. When we look at agriculture, we need less bureaucracy, less documentation. We need a wider frame for working in agriculture, in food and forestry. We have to focus on competitiveness. We have to focus on efficiency. Efficiency is the key to have a sustainable agriculture business in Germany. It's important to have ecologic issues in focus, but the main issue is to look on the whole, on a holistic approach in agriculture policy, and that's why I think Friedrich Merz is the right guy at this time.
So that was Wolfgang Schleicher there, the business representative for poultry and agriculture. He was talking about how Friedrich Merz has to focus on competitiveness. Chris, I mean, how do we think he's going to be able to do this?
Well, that is really the name of the game. This is the thing that businesses are worried about here in Germany, I can tell you absolutely. They're worried about their competitiveness. They're worried about it because of Germany itself struggling to sort of remake its economy right now. And then they're worried about it because of the problems in the rest of the world, whether it's the threat of tariffs from Donald Trump, the competition from China. So this is an incredibly difficult question. This is one of the other areas where the parties disagreed a lot. There's a lot of question about how much more to invest in the German economy, how much more the government should invest, while at the same time, of course, trying to keep its budget in check. And that has been a key debate within this election, and something, again, that the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats disagree on the best way forward, whether it's lowering taxes and lowering regulation, as you heard Wolfgang Schleicher speak of there, or invest more in the German economy as the Social Democrats might want. So this will be one of the key questions going forward, whether they can reach a confident deal that helps get the German economy back on its feet.
Chris Cermak in Berlin, thank you so much for bringing us the latest there on The Globalist. You're listening to Monocle Radio. It is 10:12 if you're listening in Damascus, 7:12 a.m. here in London. It is now 2 months since the regime of Bashar al-Assad was toppled in Syria. The interim president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, had promised profound change for the country, such as power sharing and the inclusion of minorities in government. There are still issues, though, to be resolved. And Hannah Lucinda Smith is Monocle's Istanbul correspondent. She's just come back from Syria, and I'm delighted to say she joins us on the line now. A very good morning to you, Hannah.
Good morning.
Just when you got back from Syria, what were your lasting impressions of how things are, what people are saying to you and what the priorities are?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, there is still really a sense of jubilation and still almost disbelief about the sudden way that this regime of Bashar al-Assad fell. The Assad family, in fact, had ruled Syria for 54 years. And of course, for the past 14 years, Assad had been fighting this brutal civil war against opposition factions in the country. And it ended so suddenly, of course, on the 8th of December, after the rebel lightning advance towards Damascus and Bashar al-Assad fleeing the country. So, people are still really talking about the kind of the strangeness of suddenly being free to say everything that they want to say after 5 decades of this really, really brutal police state. It's very, very hard to overstate just how oppressive Syria under the Assad family was, how wide the intelligence network was, telling jokes, even selling Turkish products in the shops. All these things could land you in prison in Assad Syria. So there's this huge sense of relief and also huge joy. People coming back to the country, all these millions of people who, for more than a decade, couldn't come back. And, it's just stories everywhere of people coming back from Egypt, from Turkey, seeing their families for the first time in absolutely years. But as well as that, there is also many, many challenges, as you said. The first one, of course, is the economy and the built environment. There are several suburbs of Damascus which are completely destroyed. There are no people living there at all. These are places that used to be kind of suburban towns around Damascus before 2011, became kind of strongholds of the opposition movement and of protests, and then were attacked by Bashar al-Assad's forces. And these really, I mean, it's sort of images reminiscent of Stalingrad, buildings which have been reduced just to skeletons, infrastructure completely smashed. And even in the centre of Damascus itself, Damascus, very luckily from a sort of heritage and cultural point of view, escaped really the worst of the fighting. There were a few sort of strikes on the city centre, but this wonderful old city of Damascus, reputed to be the oldest inhabited city in the world, that's largely escaped unscathed from the fighting. Where it has suffered is from the economy. People there told me that particularly since 2018, when the US and Europe ramped up its sanctions on Assad as a result of information about what was going on in his prisons being leaked by a former intelligence officer called Caesar. Those sanctions were really ramped up, and that had a huge impact on daily life in Damascus. There's about 2 hours of electricity a day. It's impossible to use the banking system. The banking system has been completely cut off, so you have to sort of do everything in cash. No apps will work on your phone. No sort of computer programs that you need to do updates for. People have been struggling against these kind of restrictions for the past 5 or 6 years.
And the difficulty is it's not just a domestic thing, is it? There are now huge pressures on, from those in the administration at the moment to get the rest of the world to lift sanctions so that Syria can start internationally again.
Yeah, this is what everybody told me. I spent a week talking to business people, traders, normal people, and unanimously they all said we need these sanctions to be lifted. That's not to say that everybody in Damascus is fully sure about this new government either. I heard a lot of people say, we don't fully trust the people who have taken over. This is a group formerly known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. 10 years ago, they were formally linked to al-Qaeda in the north of Syria. Since then, they've kind of rebranded. They've split from that group. They've tried to recast themselves as a more moderate and technocratic group that can run the country for all Syrians, be they Sunni Muslim, Shia, Christian, other groups. People are still nervous about them. They say we have to give them a chance because there is no other option. Overwhelmingly, they're so glad that Assad is gone. Nothing could have been worse than Assad's regime. There are some fears about what might happen over the next few months. But I have to say, this is a kind of catch-22, and it's something that also I saw in Afghanistan in 2022. These kind of groups, they in some ways, they do sort of want to play a game with the West because their countries are so desperate. Until sanctions are lifted, the aid organisations can't work there. I spoke to people who'd come in sort of scoping out the situation for humanitarian organisations, and they said, OK, we know what we need. The problem is, particularly since US aid was frozen, we don't know where we're going to get the money from. And the problem is the longer this situation goes on and the more desperate that people become, the worse that the security situation might become. So really, people are feeling like this is a really critical matter. It's a matter of months before things really start deteriorating.
Sorry, Hannah. Trust will come, though, if and when there is a new government, which is predicted to happen. I think it's at the beginning of next week, isn't it? But there are also these concerns already that when Ahmed al-Sharaa seized Damascus with the HTS, he took pains to project that image of an inclusive government, bringing people in from all walks of life, women as well, a key role. But what appears to be happening is that hasn't materialised yet, has it? So there's still an enormous leap to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the preparatory committee for the transitional government. Really Damascus and the country as a whole is really still in a very, very transitional phase. A lot of the ministries, the lesser ministries, aren't functioning at the moment. In fact, civil servants haven't been paid their wages since Assad fled, just because, as I said, money is just not coming into the country. A lot of money was stolen from the central bank when Assad left. So this is going to be the announcement of a transitional government. Ahmed al-Sharaa is now the transitional president, and he said that the aim is within 5 years to write a new constitution for Syria and also to have democratic elections. Now, that is no small task. It's not just the 14 years of war. this is a country that has no democratic basis. It has no democratic memory, no civil society, no experience of organising participatory elections. So it is going to take a long time. And what people in Damascus are hoping for is that this preparatory committee and transitional government is going to be representative. They're hoping that Christians are going to be represented on it, Alawites, which was Assad's ethnic group in Syria, all the groups that make up this very rich kind of tapestry of Syria, and of course also women. Really, people want everything to be represented, and there is optimism that Ahmed al-Sharaa is going to do this. As you say, he's really worked very hard to change the image of his group. He kind of knew that coming from the north, the more conservative regions in the north of the country that his group had controlled for a very long time, for many years, to Damascus, which is far more mixed, far more kind of open, far more cosmopolitan society, that he would have to modulate. And what a lot of people told me was, Syrians now, they have this feeling that if they can defeat Assad, they can defeat anyone. And they really feel the power of demonstration and civil society. And what many people told me was, look, if Syrian people are not feeling satisfied with the way that Ahmed al-Sharaa and his government are running the country and are preparing for this transition to democracy, they will take to the streets again. And Ahmed al-Sharaa knows that. So there is, I would say, a cautious optimism about the future of this new government.
Hannah, let's touch briefly on fears from Syrians of Israeli troops that there are incursions taking place into areas in the border, and that there are concerns that these incursions could actually turn into a prolonged military occupation. How worried are people?
Yeah, I think there's a sense of resignation. Of course, almost immediately after Assad fled, Israel moved in. Already it occupies the Golan Heights since 1973, and it moved in to take kind of more of a buffer zone along the Golan. Now, of course, for Israel, this is a hugely sensitive area, and for the past decade, Israel's been repeatedly threatened across this region by groups that were supporting Bashar al-Assad, principally Hezbollah, the Lebanese group that is supported by Iran, which, of course, was also a backer of Bashar al-Assad. Now, the initial fear for Israel, of course, is that if you have a hardline Islamist group in Damascus, these kind of groups, of course, really apathetic, not apathetic, really hostile to Israel. The fear was that kind of threat could continue. So Israel moved very quickly to take some more of a buffer zone, also to strike with their fighter jets key military assets, places like the Scientific Research Centre, which is where Assad's chemical weapons were produced, making sure that all of those kind of military installations were out of action. But now there is a sense of resignation, and I can't stress enough how tired Syrians are of war. They say, we just want peace. We need the sanctions to be lifted, and we want peace. And that includes peace with Israel. This is our neighbour. That's not to say that there's any great love there. And what people are particularly worried about is that the area that Israel has newly taken since December includes mountains, which are a really important source of water for Damascus, which is already a water poor city. So they're really worried that come summer, there might be some kind of pressure exerted on them like that. But really, people are just desperate to find any way to coexist in this really troubled neighbourhood.
Hannah Lucinda Smith, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Istanbul. Still to come on today's programme.
It's the 13th year of this award, and they only pick from things that have been released in the previous year. And there were 1,000 nominees.
Fiona Wilson will join us on the line from Tokyo to explain why Japan's love affair with stationery endures to competitive level.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio, Yossi Mackelberg, Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. Good morning, Yossi. How's life with you?
Good morning, Gemma. It's good. It's Monday and I'm here.
Fine. I'll take that. We'll go with that and we'll run with it for the next 5 days. It's nice to have you with us. Look, let's just touch briefly on what Hannah Lucinda Smith was saying. She's just come back from Syria. That sense of resignation that she described, that the Israelis are not going to go away. There could be a sort of a long-term presence there, but the Syrians just want peace at all costs, perhaps, with Israel. Israel, however, terrified of a hardline Islamic group over the border.
Yeah. There's so many places in the Middle East right now that you feel kind of the fragility of the situation. So many moving parts. So it depends how you deal with them. And I think one of the problems Israel is kind of, the current Israeli government it's almost a one-trick pony. If something goes wrong, let's send more military. Something goes wrong, let's have some more territory. Now, be cautious about what happened with Syria makes a lot of sense. You move from something that was, from Israel's point of view, represented some stability, some certainty. But also a challenge as well, because the close relations between the Bashar al-Assad regime with Hezbollah, with Iran. So actually there is a potential there, but the other side, because of the background of those who are leading Syria right now, it's also present a risk and a threat. So the immediate response is to take some strategic point within Syria and say this is temporary. The problem with temporary, it's never temporary. You get this piece of land, and then you stay there for another 20, 30 years, and no one even remembers how it started. So if it's temporary, and then moving and testing the Syrian regime, or the Syrian government right now, what is its intention, how you can actually work together to secure the border, then it's a different thing. But again, Syria right now rebuilds itself after terrible 14 years, and it needs to get the opportunity. And what actually might challenge the current government if it allows foreign occupation.
Let's move on to the papers and how the papers are covering the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky going to be talking to world leaders today, reiterating his pleas and his message in a very uncertain time. He's offered to give up his presidency, hasn't he?
He did. And just on the way here, I thought about exactly 3 years ago, I was in the studio here at the day that Russia invaded Ukraine, and we were very pessimistic. We thought, that's done. Russia will take over Ukraine. And look at the brave Ukrainian pair, really heroes there, standing up to Russia and Putin for 3 years. And then, in recent days, Zelensky is under attack by Washington, mainly by President Trump, call him a dictator, call him a terrible president, even accuse Ukraine for starting the war. So that's the first time I heard about Ukraine actually starting the war 3 years ago. And Zelensky said, yes, we didn't have election because of the war, but my country comes first. And the two things that can make sure that we maintain our territorial integrity and our safety and our sovereignty is if there is peace, or NATO. We are becoming members of NATO, and then it means that attack on us is like attack on all the other members of NATO, and you come and defend them. So let's remind ourselves that in 1994, when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, because it was part of the Soviet Union, there was an agreement with the United States, with the UK, that they will come and defend Ukraine. Now, when it happened, it's actually, yes, everyone supported in the West Ukraine, but those the Ukrainians, they're paying the price every day, including over the weekend. So I think what Zelensky says, he actually challenged the West. You might not, or Donald Trump, you might not want me, fine, I'll go. But as long as when I go, I secure the safety and the independence and sovereignty of my country.
Thank you for that. Let's move on to trouble in the United States of the kind that Elon Musk has been sending out government emails to all of the government saying, what did you do last week? In an attempt to try to see who he could possibly clear out from the offices. The difficulty is that people have started to fight back from within.
Correct, because again, in the very unsettling way that the Trump administration, but definitely Elon Musk, he sends sort of a memo, everyone within the federal government, which means millions of people should send what are 5 accomplishments. Actually, on the way here, I thought I'll ask you, actually, if you have to send such an email, what were your 5 accomplishments? I'm sure you can do it quite easily.
Well, I got up, I got dressed, and I made it to work, so that's 3. Then I made it back home again.
Yeah. And you brought us a few programs along.
I'll send my resignation in letter now. It is ridiculous, isn't it? Because then it becomes competitive. But that idea...
But it's also dangerous, because it's almost a Stasi-like. It's to unsettle you. Every one of us can think about 5 accomplishments. And honestly, if we can't have any 5 accomplishments, it's also the definition of accomplishment.
Exactly.
But let's say we did something beyond even getting dressed and coming to the office.
I mean, many times that is a pure triumph, I can tell you. So it is this, but what I quite enjoy about this story is the fact that instead of placing individuals on the spot, which is obviously an incredibly unsettling thing to do when your personal accomplishments that week are being singled out and judged effectively for your productivity by Elon Musk. The line that the new head of the FBI, a Trump appointee, is saying, don't listen to this man at the moment. We will deal with it. And then it suddenly takes it up to a much more interesting place.
And that's what he has. He created the way that Zelensky, for instance, the minute you call dictator and you start the war, then you start, answering back because it's so outlandish. The same. Just imagine that. This is the guy that's supposed to be in charge of improving efficiency. Now, if millions of people will send you emails of what they achieved in the last week, who is going to read it? How many other millions of people you need to employ in order to read it and to assess, and then to tell you that you need actually to have another 5-10 accomplishments because these are not the right one, or to praise you how wonderful you have been over the last week. It's outlandish, it's unsettling, it's to feel people insecure and in their jobs, and as a result of it. Now, when you ask the CIA and FBI, what are you going to say? I was listening to Putin on one, I was eavesdropping, it's out there. It has to be fought back, and they will fight it back.
Time is against us, Yossi, but I am desperate for you to mention this tiny village in Lancashire, which is doing rather brilliantly. I mean, gosh, it could send Elon Musk into next week, couldn't it? Yeah. Lancashire's in the northwest of the UK. It's northeast of Manchester. It is not an industrial powerhouse at all. It was part of the Industrial Revolution, but it is not a rich or highly populated county. I'm allowed to say that because my dad came from there, so we know it. But it is absolutely punching above its weight, isn't it, in terms of food?
Yes, and you probably pronounce the name of this village better than me, Auton.
I think it might be Auton.
Auton?
But I'm really sorry if I got that wrong.
Which is a village of 8,000 residents, but they have 5 Michelin stars. 3 restaurants, one with 3 stars, the Moore Hall, and 2 other with one Michelin star. So we always knew that Kyoto is the one that has per person, because they have 100 of Michelin star on 1.5 million. Here is a village in Lancashire, 5 on 8,000. So it's this a kind of a prosperous industry, if you like, or service within Lancashire that people come, and it's not famous for its great weather, but still the owner says that people come all the way from California just to taste their wonderful food. So it's a great, it tells us also, we're talking about accomplishment with initiative, with an entrepreneurship, that people can do some wonderful things and make a village that we never heard about before very famous and very successful.
And they're doing really clever things as well. What they're doing is they've got an academy for culinary arts as apprenticeship. The butcher's really good. It's
locally
nice.
sourced. Locally sourced, and the idea that unlike most of the Michelin stars in the UK is actually in London, but they have more space, they have gardens, so why not go and taste it?
Yossi Muckelberg, thank you so much for bringing that and the other stories in this morning. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. The time here in London is 7:33. A look now at the headlines. Volodymyr Zelensky says he's willing to give up the presidency of Ukraine if it means he'll bring peace to his country and speed up admission to NATO. He was speaking on the eve of today's third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Israel has sent tanks into the occupied West Bank for the first time in more than 20 years. The military has reportedly been instructed to prepare for an extended stay to fight Palestinian militant groups in the area's refugee camps. And the Vatican says Pope Francis remains in a critical condition in hospital but didn't have any respiratory episodes yesterday. Officials say he has a mild kidney issue as well. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, a moment ago, we heard about how a village in Lancashire in the UK is doing brilliantly when it comes to food and hospitality. Well, let's look at another story that's been on our radar. It's about Amsterdam's hoteliers and restaurateurs complaining about a dearth of people wanting to work in hospitality. Well, Stefan de Vries is the European Affairs correspondent at Euronews, and he brings us this story.
As a law student, I peered into the majestic 17th century Palace of Justice at the Prinsengracht in Amsterdam to witness the trials of notorious drug lords. As the Rosewood transforms this storied complex into a beacon of ultra-luxury opening this June, a different Amsterdam drama takes center stage, the battle for top talent in a booming hospitality scene. The Dutch capital, once a culinary backwater, has blossomed into one of Europe's most extravagant destinations. But in this city of Michelin-starred kitchens and €1,000 per night hotel rooms, the concept of service often seems lost in translation. The COVID-19 pandemic only worsened the industry's woes, sending skilled staff into other sectors, many never to return. Enter Rosewood with a bold hiring strategy that reads like a legal masterstroke, one not out of place echoing through these monumental halls for centuries. 4-day weeks, bespoke schedules, relocation perks, and a benefits program spanning everything from pensions to gym memberships and groceries. It's an airtight case for attracting talent, even as the Netherlands grapples with a job market where vacancies far outnumber candidates. Yet the shortage of qualified applicants at other luxury properties suggests a reckoning is afoot. To cement its status as a world-class capital, Amsterdam's hotels must first learn to pamper their colleagues by coddling their guests. Monocle reached out to other high-end hotels in the city for comment. The silence was deafening. Perhaps they too are short-staffed. Stefan de Vries in Amsterdam for Monocle Radio.
And you're back with The Globalist live on Monocle Radio with me, Emma Nelson. It is to Canada that we head next, where on Saturday, this was the sound that greeted the US national hockey team before their game against the home team Canada in Montreal.
Can you see by the dawn's early light?
That's a sound that's become familiar at sports events involving US teams in Canada since the US President Donald Trump launched his threat of tariffs against the country's exports earlier this month. But patriotic sentiment in Canada was at a particular high on Saturday for another reason too. The 60th anniversary of Canada's national flag, whose familiar red and white maple leaf design was first hoisted in Ottawa on the 15th of February 1965. Well, Monocle's correspondent in Canada, Thomas Lewis, takes a look for us now at the flag's history and assesses how its meaning has evolved for Canadians at home and for those looking on at the country from abroad in the 60 years since it was first unfurled.
In the early 2000s, a researcher at Canada's National Archives made a discovery. Tucked inside a box of papers was a letter typed out on the 23rd of March 1964, making the case for the design of a new national Canadian flag. Its author was George Stanley, who was a military historian and a former lieutenant colonel in the Canadian Army. His letter was addressed to the parliamentary committee tasked with commissioning a new official design for Canada's national flag, a process that had been set in motion by Canada's Prime Minister at the time, Lester B. Pearson, who'd been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize a few years before. The letter laid out a manifesto of sorts about what a new national flag should convey to Canadians at home and to audiences abroad. And his prescription was a pretty simple one. A Canadian flag, he wrote, must be sufficiently Canadian that it can be easily recognised at a distance as being Canadian. Well, to illustrate the idea, he sketched out his design in red pen on the white page. In the centre of the flag was a stylised motif of a maple leaf, flanked by two bold red bars. If the flag is to be a unifying symbol, Stanley went on, it must avoid the use of national or racial symbols that are of a divisive nature. That meant omitting symbols of Canada's colonial history, like the United Kingdom's Union flag, for example, or the fleur-de-lis of France. And not everyone was happy about that. Stanley would later recount several occasions where the new flag's opponents, in person and by post, threatened to have him shot. Threats aside, Stanley's winning design was hoisted in Ottawa for the first time at midday on the 15th of February 1965, a date that's been marked officially as Canada's Flag Day since 1996.
A bit of showmanship here, they're holding up. Here's the Canadian flag is coming into the arena. The Canadian flag, I can see it from here, and Oh Canada!
The maple leaf is, of course, a symbol of the country itself. You'll find iterations of it on most parts of the national furniture, from stamps to banknotes, from Canada's space programme to the tail fins of the national carrier. Canada's designers have reimagined it too over the years, for the branding of big events like NATO or G7 summits, to the fabled Expo 67 exposition in Montreal, and years later, the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympic Games in Vancouver in 2010. But the maple leaf has come to represent the country's soft power too. From the UN peacekeeping missions Canadian personnel became so associated with for several decades, and even to the backpacks of some American backpackers who, while they were travelling abroad during times when the US was at war, were said to be fond of stitching little Canadian flags to their bags so that they could travel under the guise of a nationality that was deemed to be friendlier and less divisive than their own. But in 2022, the flag, to some, began to embody something narrower. When long-haul truckers blockaded Ottawa for a month in protest at Canada's COVID-19 vaccine mandates, the protesters assumed the flag as their own, draping the maple leaf over their vehicles and their shoulders during their demonstrations. This, in the process, tinted the flag with politics, something that it had, for large parts of its history as the national flag, been able to flutter high above. And that meant that for many Canadians, no longer did the flag feel entirely universal. It seemed now to represent the worldview of the few, rather than that of the many. But then...
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
Trump was sworn in as President of the United States for a second time, this time around with Canada firmly in his sights.
You know, the Prime Minister said this weekend to a group of Canadian businessmen, he was at a private meeting, he said that your wish for Canada to be the 51st state is a, quote, real thing. Is it a real thing?
Yeah, it is.
President Trump's talk of annexing Canada and his threats of tariffs on the country's exports has angered, galvanised and unified much of the country in a way that feels fairly rare.
As I've said unequivocally from the beginning, there's not a snowball's chance in hell that Canada will ever be the 51st state.
And it's the flag, once again, that's become a rallying point for people right across the country, in public places, at sports arenas and at supermarkets too, some of which are placing little Canadian flags next to the price tags of those goods that were made in Canada, so that shoppers can avoid buying goods manufactured in the US, while America's economic hostilities against the country continue. Several factories in Canada that manufacture the Canadian flag appear to confirm this patriotic upswing in the country, reporting that demand for the maple leaf flag has soared in the past 2 weeks to around double that of the same period last year. In Canada then, on its national flag's 60th birthday, it feels as though this national emblem, at the moment at least, has come once again, as close as perhaps a national flag can, to being an emblem for everyone. For Monocle in Toronto, I'm Thomas Lewis.
Thomas Lewis there, Monocle's correspondent in Canada on the 60th anniversary of the flag. You're listening to Monocle Radio. 16:44 in Tokyo, 8:44 a.m. in Zurich. And as we do every year, we cover now Japan's prestigious Stationery Awards. For its 13th edition, a whopping 1,000 nominated items were judged by 13 stationery experts. And who best to go through the winners with? Well, Fiona Wilson, our Tokyo bureau chief and senior Asia editor. She talked to Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco about her favourite winners.
Forget the Oscars and all the acting awards. This is what we're really interested in, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, you know, you've been to Japan. The stationery shops here are just detailed beyond belief. And there's just, you know, people love stationery here. You know, they like the pens, the Post-its, they like the pencil cases. And of course, everyone is glued to their smartphones like they are everywhere else. But when it comes to stationery, they take it very, very seriously. So yes, I think Japan is the perfect place for these stationery awards.
And especially for this interview, I'm writing here some notes with my Pilot GTEC C4, which I think makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about some of the winners. Well, talking about Pilot, if you don't mind that we start there, I think he got one of the awards, the Grand Award, right, with their highlighters.
That's right. Not just any award, please. I mean, you know, so, I mean, to give you an idea of how much stationery is pumped out of Japan, this award, it's the 13th year of this award, and they only pick from things that have been released in the previous year. And there were 1,000 nominees. So I think you can see there's plenty of new stationery. So yes, straight to the grand prize, drum roll please. And it's a Pilot pen. I mean, Pilot pens are not expensive. They do an expensive range, but the average pen, the best bit about all this stuff is this is really accessible. We're talking about 120 yen. I mean, these things are costing €1, nothing really. And the one that won is this highlighter pen. Now, you know, how exciting can that be? But if you care, it is quite exciting because it's got two ends, super fine highlighting. It doesn't come through the paper. It dries in a second. And it doesn't smudge whatever you're highlighting. And, you know, they said we wanted to help students. And I can see why it won an award. And it's also got this brilliant little thing where, this is very detailed, it's got a sort of stabilizer. So, you know, when you swipe across a text with a highlighter, you can go a bit wonky. Not with this one, you won't. It steadies the tip and it's very neat. So I think all the stationery fans love that one.
That's very helpful. We need a very good stabilizer and neat, as you said. And there's some kind of innovations here and there. One that caught my eye, I think, was Koji Jirushi kind of stamp collection. I mean, that looks amazing. There were a lot of different shapes and kind of ice cubes and, you know, all sorts of things.
Yeah, they often do well in this award. I mean, stamping, printing is quite a big thing here. And one thing that not annoys people, but a little bit of an irritation is they're usually made from wood. So when you put the stamp onto the paper, you can't quite see where the stamp is going. And if you like multiple stamps, which people who care and make their own postcards do, you can't see where you're putting the stamp. So what they thought, I know, let's make the stamp translucent. You can see through, you can see exactly where the stamp is going. So that got, you know, because of course you have to remember there are awards for design, idea, functionality. And yeah, this one was a sort of popular ideas award. So, and I think it is a brilliant idea. You know, and if you go into all the shops that we love, Itoya, this very old stationery company in Ginza, everyone's going there and they want to see what's new. So novelty is a big thing. And I thought that was quite fun as well. But yeah, it got the idea prize.
You mentioned Itoya, which is a dream, but there's so many places to buy stationery in Japan. Tokyo Hands actually is excellent on that. I mean, where do you actually go and buy your stationery, Fiona?
I'm a big Hands fan. As you know, it's very close to the Monocle office here. And you just go in, they've got everything. I mean, I'm not really buying expensive pens. What I love about all these, companies in Japan like Pilot is they do a very cheap pen that really works. You don't get blotting. I just need something that I can take notes in while I'm doing an interview. And, they really work on making it, so that you can hold it, that the rubber that they encase it in is easier to grip. I mean, another one that won an award, I need to try this one. It's a Mitsubishi pencil one. And, the whole thing about this award is that it solves problems you never knew you had. And apparently people are complaining about paper slippage with some of these pens, that there's a bit of friction when you write on a bit of paper and it moves. So what Mitsubishi Pencil has done is created this pen that the light touch ink just slides onto the paper and you don't have this problem. So I'm looking for that one, and that will definitely be in Hands. And it's very cheap. So it's an easy thing to try. Great souvenir if you're coming to Japan.
And one that is, a tiny bit more expensive that I really want to get is the Bandy pen case. I thought that looks stunning. That looks great. And it looks like it's made with Denning as well. It's really nice.
Yeah, that one intrigued me. So that is actually made of it's leather, but it's recycled leather. It's very, very reasonable price. It's not an expensive product. And when I read about it, I thought, it said it's responding to this sort of premium pen boom, which I have to say I wasn't wholly on top of. But apparently, a lot of schoolboys in Japan like these very expensive pens, and they want somewhere decent to store the pens. But they want to spend the money on the pens, not on the pencil case. So this was a bit of a compromise. And I love that the company who make this are called Luddite, which I think is true. They are Luddites. It's old-fashioned craftsmanship. But, I think the point is that you can have all these things. You can have the pencil case and the pens, and you can have your smartphone and work off a tablet. And I think that's probably the reality for most students who will, incidentally, you have to remember that we're coming to the end of the school year in Japan. So this is all in preparation for the start of the new school year at the beginning of April. So they time it to perfection for those brand new pencil cases on day one.
That's fantastic. And finally, Fiona, just a little, we also have a shop, of course, in Tokyo. And I'm pretty sure we sell some lovely stationery too, right?
We do, and people love, they come in for the notebooks. Sometimes novelty comes in the form of it not being from Japan. So sometimes people are like, they want to see what are we bringing in from overseas? What are the Germans doing in notebooks? They're interested in that sort of freshness. So yeah, we do stationery, and it's really popular. In fact, I was in the shop today and someone was just buying a Monocle notebook. So clearly a big seller.
Fiona Wilson there on Japan's Stationery Awards, and leaving fans of stationery absolutely breathless with excitement. For more stories like this, tune into The Stack every single week. Fernanda Augusto Pacheco is your host for that. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time now to talk business with Isabel Hamilton, senior reporter at The Daily Upside. Welcome back to The Globalist, Isabel.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. Let's talk about a clothing company which specialises in massively quick, fast turnarounds. It wants to float on the London Stock Exchange, but it does have problems.
Yes, so this is Shein. And Shein, along with another company called Temu, are really well known for selling this extremely cheap mostly clothing online. And they're these two sort of up-and-coming, well, they've been around for a couple of years now, but these sort of parvenu e-commerce giants. But they're at this really sensitive moment in time because while they've been growing really explosively for a few years, that's been based on the fact that they've had a business model that relies on a tax exemption. It's called de minimis. And they've been directly shipping their clothing, their items, to customers all this time, which is kind of extraordinary when you think about the massive logistics involved. But this tax exemption is under threat. Donald Trump has gotten rid of it. The EU is looking at it. And now, according to the FT, its profits have dropped by more than a third last year. So it's at a really sensitive moment in its sort of journey as a company.
So what does it do next?
Well, apparently it's looking to actually slash its internal valuation to try and get itself over the line for this London IPO that it had planned. The IPO was slated for April, but it sounds like now it might get pushed to the second half of this year, according to sources that spoke to the FT. So it looks like they're giving themselves a little bit of extra wiggle room.
Isabel Hamilton, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. Finally, France is famous for its female figureheads bringing the values of the country to life. Take, for example, Marianne, the symbol of beauty and liberty. Well, if you head to the Salon d'Agriculture this week in Paris, you'll be greeted at the entrance by another female character who's a celebration of France's bounty. Oupette, a 6-year-old limousine cow, really big girl, very beautiful girl as well, the official muse of the fair. Well, she'll be in her own stall, ready to be photographed, and has just met Emmanuel Macron. Well, Simon Bouvier is Monocle's Paris bureau chief, and he joins us now. Good morning, Simon. I mean, Oupette is a beauty,
Bonjour,
isn't
Emma.
she?
She is, and they have this tradition at the Salon de l'Agriculture of picking a pin-up girl, so to speak, every year. I'm more partial myself to the Normand brown spotted cows that were kind of highlighted last year with that year's Égérie, but I got to say that Oupette is bringing the majesty, and her little veal Vienne is also alongside her. So this combo of majesty and cuteness is a winner for sure.
The majesty and cuteness is something that France is extremely good at, but the Salon d'Agriculture is huge, isn't it? It's the world's biggest food and agriculture fair. So it's a huge moment. It's a big moment for France.
That's right, and also it is a very important political moment as well. You know, France has 800,000 farmers, but by some estimates, there are about 25% of the French electorate are classified as rural voters who are very sympathetic to farmers and their demands. And so every national politician worth their salt is going to be photographed or filmed walking through the Salon de l'Agriculture. It's already happened, as you mentioned, with President Macron. And all of this week, it's going to be a kind of constant parade of national politicians there as well.
Oupette is an absolute beauty, as we've mentioned, but her owner has already gone publicly to say that actually France's agriculture, as you say, is an enormously important part of the culture of society and of the economy. But there is a genuine fear that there is that young people in the next generation is going to shy away from it.
Yes, Emma, there's real anger, and there has been for a few years in the farming communities. I guess it's not a monolith, but there are some real problems with the business model of all of this, and in particular, the kind of relationship between the producers and the wholesalers. The wholesalers of the supermarkets have all of the power to set the prices, and a number of laws have been passed in the past few years to try and rebalance that, but they have not been effective. Last year, Macron was booed and heckled constantly because of the government's inaction on this front. This year, his visit went smoothly, but it is a real problem for France in general, and also for the EU, because all different countries don't agree on what the best policy is for this. France is definitely in the camp of the producers, and so they're trying to do their best to protect their farmers from being too vulnerable to these prices.
Indeed. I mean, the demands of farmers, we've seen them block and sort of cut off Paris. Do you think they'll be met?
For now, I think that there's a lot of posturing. They just the Assemblée Nationale just passed a law that it kind of addresses symbolically a lot of their demands, but is very, very kind of short on specifics. I think that applying the laws that already exist is also a demand that farmers have. You know, the law technically requires the distributors to sign contracts with all of the different producers that guarantee a minimum price and so on and so forth. But even though the law requires it, it has not been implemented yet. So I think that's a good place to start for sure.
Simon Bouvier, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Paris. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and also to our producers too, Hassan Anderson and Tom Webb. Our researcher was Maisie Ringer and our studio manager was Alan Whedon. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you for listening. Have a great week.